So James, thanks for coming on to the podcast today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dave.
No worries. I want to just dive straight into talking about this new podcast that you and Tim have been working on to do with public markets. So I guess my first question is sort of where did that idea come from? Because you guys are 2 episodes in now, but at what point did you start thinking, hey, maybe we should start a podcast?
I think part of it was having a bit of spare time during lockdown and thinking about some of the things that we'd been working on as part of a broader review of where we were heading as a practice. And so once we actually started doing that, we started realizing that there's probably a body of knowledge that was kind of stored away on, in our heads and on computers that we'd never really put out in the public realm. And I think we were interested in sharing that information, but also it was a really useful exercise for us just to actually collect all those thoughts together and try and put it into some kind of structure. And so the podcast seemed like a really logical thing to do. We had a bit of a secret weapon. We had Alicia Brown from New Doors. She's been helping us with marketing, and she'd done a few podcasts and said, look, the kind of technical aspect, which was maybe what had held us back in the past, or just the fear of unknown a bit. She got us over that completely. And as you know, doing your own podcast, the technology is kind of already there, pretty easy to access. We certainly didn't find that part of it hard. It was really the structuring of the information and trying to make it seem like it was a bit off the cuff. We had a lot of experimenting with how best to actually do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So we'll talk about the construction of the podcast because I'm really interested, and I can tell from listening to it that you have put quite a lot of work into really thinking that stuff through. But I guess just in terms of the overall topic that you've picked, which is public markets, you've got it's a kind of a personal connection with that, and you guys have also done work in that area. But I guess why the public market topic first? Was there any other topics that you guys were considering, or was that the straight away the obvious?
It seemed straight away obvious in that it was a bit of a niche. And one of the things that we were really looking at is, okay, well, what work have we done over the last 15 years? What kind of buckets can you put it in, and what are the overlaps? And we weren't quite sure why we'd ended up with a lot of public markets work. That's it had relationships to a lot of the other work that we were doing, and it started to sort of become more about thematics rather than specific types of work. But public markets were definitely something that we said, okay, well, we've done quite a few of them now, not whole markets, but we've been involved in markets of various sizes and various stages. And so it was really about sort of saying, okay, well, if we're going to do one, markets is probably one that has the most material at hand without us having to sit down and kind of try and generate a whole lot of new content. So there's a bit of laziness in there.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So you've chosen a marketing strategy in an area that you're already very solid in. You're not going, we want to do markets, we've never done one before, let's start a podcast about them, which when you actually say it out loud, it sounds like a pretty silly idea, doesn't it? You've gone, let's
Say it out loud. Yeah.
that would make for a really substantial podcast, wouldn't it? Two guys that don't know anything about the topic discussing it for 30 minutes. So you've done the opposite, which is the really good strategy. You've looked at the different areas that you've got expertise in, these different buckets, and gone, this is the one that we think we know the most about. We could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think once we started, we realized that actually one podcast wasn't going to be enough too. So then we had to break it down into different components. And that's again when we sort of realized, okay, well, we've actually got a lot that we can draw on. And Alicia really helped us structure that. So she really was the one that said, okay, well, you're going to have to break this into 3. Otherwise, it's just going to be a giant dump. And you want to have something left to come back to and keep going with.
So
set up these sort of 3 questions at the start about the challenges, how markets might change, and then finally, what's the future? And we haven't actually done the future markets podcast yet. We're running a
Yeah.
bit behind on that one.
So that's cool. So you decided at the outset that you wanted it to be like a 3-part series, and then it's kind of in the can, done and dusted at that point. And then do you guys think about maybe starting a new podcast on another topic, or do we go to season 2 of Public Markets? The
Uh,
return of the
yeah,
markets, is that?
yeah. No, I reckon we'd be pretty much done by the 3rd.
Yeah.
It was starting to feel by the 2nd that maybe, are we going to get to the 3rd? So, I don't know how you find it, but yeah, it is quite a lot of headspace that you have to have, and you both have to be in the right kind of frame of mind as well when you're doing it with 2 people. And we also have had Alicia there choreographing it as well, which has been great, because otherwise I'm not sure that we would have had the discipline to keep going after the first one.
Okay.
But yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah. So the structure of the episodes is basically the two of you guys kind of almost, as much as you've tried to make it feel quite off the cuff, you've clearly prepared like a lot of content for each episode. They're like 25-minute episodes, and it's you and Tim kind of sort of taking turns, kind of back and forth, kind of, browsing these different subtopics of the bigger topic of public markets. Or you've picked a theme of each episode, then you're covering the many kind of aspects of it.
yeah.
So as far as like putting the episodes together, did you guys write a script, or what was your process for actually getting to the point where you were sitting down having that conversation?
Yeah, that was interesting, because we definitely started out thinking we could off the cuff it, and then we thought, okay, well, if we're going to do that, it's probably a format similar to the one that we're having now, where it's
Yeah.
maybe more an interview.
Yeah.
And Alicia was keen to sort of sit in the background a bit more and not be so front and center. So she said, okay, well, it's really got to be you guys having a conversation. And then once we started that, we just found that if we didn't have some structure, we just meandered all over the place. And so, which some of it was good, but then on balance, we said, okay, well, we really need to put a bit more structure around it. And that's when we started saying, okay, well, let's think about it as topics. Let's write some dot points, subtopics within the topic.
Yep.
Let's make sure that we hit this point. And I think the first one, we may have even written out a few of the things, and you can probably hear it when I'm terrible at reading things
Yeah.
and pretending that I'm not. So we tried. It was really a bit of trial and error at the start, and I think I hope we got better as we went through it. But we did definitely needed a bit of structure around it, just because there were really key points that we were trying to hit. And as you said, it was only 25 minutes. So if you weren't on topic, you're kind of missing things, and we'd have to go back and re-record it. We had a few sound issues, which meant that we did kind of re-record probably half of the first one, I'd say. And the other thing was, we were in lockdown too, so we were remote, trying to pretend that we're in the same room, which was pretty funny.
So you guys were just doing it over Zoom, basically?
Yeah, we Alicia used Zencaster.
Zencaster, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And that worked out well. You felt that you were able to still have that kind of studio chemistry that you were hoping.
As much as you can. I mean, I don't know how you found it, but I've certainly found it pretty difficult, the online stuff.
Yeah.
Tim and I sort of been working together long enough that we managed to find that chemistry. But there were moments where we were both kind of looking at blank screens, and the sound wasn't working very well. There was a lot of feedback going on when we initially did it too. So we ended up buying a proper microphone, which was pretty good investment.
Oh, that's good. That's great.
Should be using that now, actually, but
Oh, no, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Okay, so you're going through this, and then you're recording on Zencaster, then it's getting edited down and getting produced and all that stuff. Interested. Okay, so the stuff that you've picked to talk about in the podcast, where you guys are really you're really dropping the knowledge, like quite kind of in depth knowledge about this area. Who was you're obviously when you're doing that, you're obviously deciding what level of complexity are we going to go to on this topic, and you're probably thinking about framing that around who's listening to it, right? Because I was listening to it and it kind of felt like it wasn't for somebody who only went to markets, to buy a cucumber. It was more like this is for people that are like really, this is people who are operationally like living, breathing the market industry, which is obviously, depending on how you look at it, I guess you could say a fairly small niche, right? But I guess where do you guys think the limits of who your listener base is for this podcast?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're spot on. If someone downloaded the podcast thinking we're going to be talking about what fruit and veg is this week, they'd be pretty disappointed. But yeah, we didn't want to get too technical either. So in terms of the people we were pitching to, it was really people involved in markets, whether that be people actually working at markets, or perhaps more so we're thinking about people who are considering how you might start a market. Not to say that we had the knowledge to explain to someone how to do that, but we've certainly been around people like David O'Neill from PPS and others to see what might be involved. And so they were the kind of people we were thinking, hopefully they'll be listening. If not, it's probably not a bad exercise for us to consolidate our thoughts. But yeah, people that are actually working at markets, I think hopefully there was enough in there for them to kind of take away things from that without it getting to, we tried to keep it very deliberately not architectural. And that's always hard as an architect, as you know. And so, yeah, we weren't pitching it at architects in any way. We also tried not to sort of start out with, okay, well, we're going to get a job out of this, because there's just no way of knowing that. And the kind of things that you'd say to try and win work aren't necessarily what we had on the podcast. So we tried to keep it as honest as we could, not pretend that we sort of knew things that we didn't. And yeah, keep it quite conversational in tone, but make sure that we got into enough depth that someone who was interested in markets would find it kind of meaty and want to keep listening to it.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned a couple of really interesting things there. And the first that I want to ask about is this idea of we didn't talk about architecture. Now, that makes sense to me from a making a product that people want to listen to standpoint. That, if it was all just about, I want guess you to talk to me about where you separate what you guys are talking about in the podcast from what you would talk about if you were deciding, okay, we're going to talk about the architecture of the markets. Yep. How do you sit with this idea that we're architects, architecture is our skill set, that's what we're kind of about, but we're going to do a podcast where we don't really talk about architecture? How do you get to a place with that where that feels natural and makes sense, like you've got a clear idea of what your job is there?
Yeah, so this has taken a long time, I think, because you just naturally instinctively want to talk about buildings and quality of light and materials and all those things that excite and interest us as architects, but are also interesting for people using a market. But the thing that we found with markets is there's so much sort of misunderstanding around what architecture can do and be for a market, that we wanted to kind of dispel a few of those myths and not sort of add to that by saying, okay, well, we're architects, we're going to talk about markets. So here's how you should design a market, and a market should look like this, and all those kind of I get arrogance, one word, but that sort of egoistic approach where you're the architect, the best layout for the market. Markets don't evolve in that way, and generally design has been seen as something that's actually quite counter to markets. So I think what we wanted to show was an understanding around a process for designing a market that could involve architects, that would actually be more than just a pure kind of aesthetic design exercise. And so that was something that's it's taken a while to kind of get to that point. And I think the temptation to sort of go, oh, here's an amazing concept we did for a market in Sydney. Aren't we great? Uh, what does that actually mean for someone who's thinking about a market? They look at it and they go, okay, well, there's some nice design features there, but actually, how do the logistics work? How does the circulation work? How does the flow work? How does flexibility work? How does expansion over time work? Those maybe they're not super sexy in some ways, but if you don't understand those things and can talk about them, I think architects will always be dismissed in that arena. And you can point to examples overseas and go, oh, look at Barcelona. They've just got the most incredible 42 markets that have all been redeveloped. And some of them are absolutely stunning pieces of architecture. But if you're a market person who's thinking about redeveloping here in Australia, that's a long way away in terms of the kind of things that people do with markets here, and also the way that markets tend to develop here. They don't generally not starting with a clean slate. Often they're, like Queen Victoria market, they're evolving over time and incrementally. So they're quite different sort of design exercises, if you like. So I think it was about thinking, well, what's actually useful as designers? How can we kind of prove our worth to these clients or these potential clients? And what have we learnt on our other projects that we can bring to that's beyond just sort of a bit of a sales pitch around design is the answer for everything. And I think, because we actually had a statement from David O'Neill, who I mentioned before. He said, architects kill markets. That was his just... And then we were in the audience when he gave that talk, and I went, oh, crap. Maybe we should leave this talk and just not even consider.
We'll let ourselves out.
Yeah, that's right. We weren't putting our hands up at question time. So sort of when you start with that statement, well, how do you bring people around? Because sure, if some architects have come in and kind of completely ruined some markets, but the potential to be involved in that process is something that we were kind of really fighting for.
Yeah, that's great. So, and you touched on this earlier that, we weren't trying to think of it as how do we win a job out of this? And I think you've just kind of accepted that it may or may not work out. And it sounds like you've got an attitude of it probably won't work out. But that's actually, in my opinion, helped you because it's allowed you to just kind of like have a much more, well, we're doing one anyway. Whatever happens, happens. How do we make it as good as possible for the people who are going to listen to it? We're not as concerned about what the payoff might be for us. And I think in doing that, you've actually produced something a lot more successful. Is that how it feels? You're kind of like, and well, I guess firstly, is that kind of how it feels? But secondly, how do you have the drive or the commitment to create something when you've kind of convinced yourself, I'm not necessarily going to gain something in the short term from doing this? So two separate questions, but I want to kind of...
Yeah. Well, maybe the last question first. So it's really the long game. And I think what we got to after we sort of had this rethink, which, I mean, you touched on it earlier, it was pretty recent that we'd actually started thinking about marketing and what are we doing and what should we be doing. And really, we had no strategy up until, I'm going to say a year ago. It was just work comes from somewhere. We seem to get a lot of referrals. And, Ray Brown, who you've had on your podcast before, has helped us a lot with this. He's been with us for longer than a year, but it's sort of only sunk in the last year. We're a bit slow. And it was really about, okay, well, we need to be thinking about the kinds of work that we want, and we need to be getting out there and trying to actually build a brand around that. And that's a slow thing. And it's not a case of just, whiz bang graphics. How are we going to differentiate ourselves in a really competitive market? And we decided that our experience and our knowledge was the best way to do that, and to try and convey that in a hopefully in an interesting way. If it's not interesting, we'll get better at it. But it was just something about okay, well here's some knowledge that might be useful. Why not share it? It's also been really good in terms of giving us the confidence that okay, well we can do more of that and keep going, and then start to change direction in terms of the things that we pitch as well. So you mentioned before why markets and will we keep going with markets? We're hoping we'll get more market work, but it's quite hard to know when that's going to happen. I mean, it's not like resi where there's a reasonable consistency, especially recently. Seems like that's kind of picked up a lot. You're not sure when they're going to happen. You're not sure when council are going to have funds to do that kind of work. So you just kind of keep that ticking along. But at the same time, we've built up this approach of, okay, well, sharing thought leadership was one description, which might be a bit over the top, but in that small field, if you can show that you're actually thinking about some of the things that are impacting and affecting clients, then that's something that we thought was really worthwhile. And it was back to that conversation about not going to meetings and meeting people, having a coffee and expecting to get a job at the end of it, which when Ray first started helping us with marketing, that was, I couldn't understand that. I said, well, if I'm going to have a coffee, I'm going to get something out of it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, I was listening to one of your other podcasts where you were talking about the percentage of people that are actually looking for work at that time, at any one time, is so small. So you can't expect that you're going to have coffee with them at that magic moment. So having this I guess back catalogue of things that we've been thinking about and working on, and continuing to develop that content it's taken a long time to realize that that's really important as well. So that we've got to actually stop doing some work once a week and get on our podcast, even though it is a struggle sometimes because there's so many competing interests in an office.
Yeah, how do you manage time to be able to work on this stuff? Because you guys haven't just gone, all right, we're going to do some marketing. Let's get somebody to have a look at the website and let's start posting a bit more often on Instagram. You've not done that kind of surface level stuff. You've just jumped straight in the deep end of the pool and gone, all right, let's start a podcast. Let's start working on some blog posts. Like you've reached straight for the most like time consuming options you could possibly find yourself. So that must have been a kind of a big change, and obviously the mindset and the enthusiasm for it sounds like it's there, and you guys have gotten past the planning phase and you've got stuff that's out and you've got good people that are helping you and everything. But as far as fitting it into your lifestyle at the practice and how you work as directors, and do you guys carve out, like, do we have marketing day? Is there like
no, spot on. I mean, we have sales day and we have marketing day, and they're both 2-hour meetings, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday, and Alicia's at the marketing meeting, and sometimes we bring in Ray as well, but Katie from our Brisbane office is also there. And so we don't have a lot of meetings, the three of us together. That's one of them. And so, that's become really quite formalized. And again, the whole sort of structure once we went into lockdown felt really constricting at the time when we first started doing it. But it's been a good thing, I think, now that we're back in it again. But that, we now have that in the calendar every week, and we got into the habit of doing it, and now we keep doing it. And it was very much the same when we started doing board meetings. It's just, you have to have that time no matter what's going on. So it's not a whole day, it's just a couple of hours. But then we have separate recording times for podcasts, for instance.
So you guys do an actual weekly, so have a sales meeting as well, but you'll have a weekly 2-hour meeting. Right, okay. That's quite cool.
On marketing, and that'll be Alicia, and Alicia's we've got a running list of things that we're trying to do, and we're looking at having her more involved this year, as we seem to be getting a bit busier now, which is great.
Yeah.
Things are picking up again. So we've sort of realized we're going to drop the ball if we're not really careful and we don't allocate enough time to other people. So we've also got someone in the office who's helping Alicia. And so Alicia's been doing quite a bit of the content in terms of saying, right, okay, guys, well, if we're going to talk, we've recently won a social housing project. And so Tim wrote a piece on that. Alicia wrote the draft and then Tim reviewed it. So we've got a kind of process in place. Often it's an interview format first. We found it's great because you could just do what we're doing now and let it all go. And then Alicia's been really great at structuring that and formatting it and toning the language down and you know, sometimes
no, definitely.
filling the arc speak out of it as well.
Yeah, so I've just looked at some of the other topics that you guys have come up with on some of these blog posts. You've got like what shopping centers can learn from public markets in a post-COVID-19 world, which is kind of tapping in. It's sort of a, you know, echo of the podcast, I guess. And then you've got this other one, high-rise contagion, cabin fever, and housing affordability crisis, exploring a new take on the Scandi solution. So you're picking kind of a mix of sort of related things, but these are some of the written articles. And I guess strategically, like where do you sort of separate what becomes what's better suited as a written article versus what's suited as a podcast? Potentially, or another format. I'm not sure what other kind of plans you guys have in progress at the moment.
Yeah, well, then there's probably the third thing is just the more typical, how do you talk about a project? And we're trying to reframe that right now. So that's been an interesting one. It's like, okay, well, previously we had a website that was just a total encyclopedia of everything we'd ever done, including, you know, and how do you find any of it and what, you know, what's relevant and what are the thematics was sort of became more interesting to us. And so I think the podcasts I'm not exactly sure yet how we're going to distinguish between podcasts and written pieces because sometimes I think they're going to have overlaps. But yeah, I think the other thing that we're really keen to do is start to actually look at the projects that we've done and talk about them in a way, again, that's more informative around things that we've learned, lessons that we've learned, responses from clients. So what are the things that they've found important rather than necessarily us, you know? I mean, the glossy photos are always going to be there. But beyond that, what's actually sits behind that project and what was the process for that and who were the other people involved? I think, that was something that was missing on our old website. It was just, oh my God, okay, that's quite a lot of projects. Well done. So
yeah. So I was actually going to ask about that as well, because you've basically you've created almost like written summaries, and anybody that's listening can go to Tandem Studios about page and just have a look. So there's really succinct written summaries of stuff that you've got in progress, and then you've got like our list of like our best hits or our best of or something like that, where you just got, 4 or 5 of what you're kind of calling your best projects, or I suppose your like milestone projects. And then there's kind of, you can't even find like a project section of your website. Like the portfolio in the traditional sense has basically just been chucked out the window. And so now you're kind of turning them into almost like essays, right? And that's how they're, and I think you touched on something really interesting there, that it's kind of focused more on the story behind the story. So if the project is kind of, is a response to COVID or whatever, then it's a COVID story. And if it's like it's more of like, what's the narrative, what's the thing that's actually driving this project, or what's our main challenge, it seems like. So that's quite an interesting way to do that. So are you gonna upload your old projects, or are you just going, hey, the glossy photos, they're over on Instagram if you need them, or is that?
Well, yeah, that actually, that there's a lot in that, what you just said, I reckon. So I think the idea that the website is the sole platform now is completely dead. And that was where we started. We said, okay, well, why do you even bother going to a website anymore? And we I've got a mate, Andrew Ashton, who's a really, really talented graphic designer, but he's also he's a great thinker, and he just said, okay, what do you want this website to be? And he gave us 3 options, because he knew if he just gave us the one, we'd go, nah, sorry, mate, that's way too radical. But he basically had one that was fairly close to what we had, one that was sort of halfway there, and then one that said, bugger it, get rid of all the projects, and just put down some key themes that Tandem are about. And everything else can live somewhere else. And if you want to, you can add to it later on. But let's just kind of clean the slate and just have a series of cycling images that were meant to be provocative as well. So not hugely provocative, but more provocative than some architectural websites, which it was about asking questions as much as saying, okay, well, this is what we think. And yeah, the little bits of text were, a lot of that was actually Andy. So he's been involved in our practice long enough to be able to really kind of distill some of the things that Tim and I were interested in. And once he started to do that, we kind of got on board with it and said, yeah, right, well, let's take that tone of voice, which was a bit different from, I think, what you would have got if you just started with Tim and I. It had a succinctness to it that I think we would have struggled with. But once he set that up, we said, okay, well, that really works. So let's keep that short piece of text with each image, just punchy and a couple of lines. And then, yeah, LinkedIn's become something where we put a lot of our effort in terms of the longer format pieces. So we'll always post an essay on there. But I think the thing you said before about, well, where's the portfolio? We're going back and reviewing which projects we really think are important now and why are they important, and how can we bundle those together too, rather than just saying, here's a house in Albert Park, here's one in here's one in Kew, or wherever. Probably not Kew. So, you know, what are the thematics that run through those projects? And it might be that a residential project and a multi-residential project and a piece of work at a market can go together. And that's pretty much one of the tactics, and it's not always successful, that we use when we meet clients, is to really talk about the fact that our range of work isn't singular in focus, and it's there's quite a lot of overlap between those different areas that we work in. And it doesn't always work. Some people go, oh, well, you know, why would I choose you guys to do a house when this guy's done 50 houses and that's all he does? And I get that. I mean, but yeah, we haven't. So that's the way that we've rethought the work that we've done, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. So your approach is kind of interesting, because you're not just picking a niche in the sense of like pigeonholing yourself in something and going, we only do this from now on. Tandem is now the public markets architecture firm. That's it. That's us from now on. And we're going to double down and put all our chips right there. But you're also not avoiding going into depth in these specific niches. So you've got these kind of deep vertical niches that you're putting a lot of expertise and info into, but then you're managing multiple niches at the same time. So you can kind of become a specialist in these different areas or communicate like a specialist, but nobody's looking at you and going, oh, they only do one thing. So you're kind of living proof that, you know, there isn't a danger to going, we're going to spend a lot of time on this one particular area and creating content about it, communicating about it. So you guys weren't afraid, like at any point launching the podcast, for example, you know, people are just going to think we just talk about public markets all day. Did that concern ever come up, or were you pretty much sure from the beginning that's not going to be an issue?
I think we thought we wanted to just sort of see how it went. I guess it was a bit of an experiment. And the thought was, well, we could follow it up pretty quickly with another series of podcasts on another topic.
Yeah, we can fix it. We can fix it.
Yeah, that's right. Let's just pretend that one never happened, and move on.
Yeah.
But yeah, we really thought, okay, well, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. We're going to jump in. and try it. And the amount of information that we had collected over the years, it was just sitting there, and it just sort of needed us to actually put the time in to think about it. And that's kind of been the key. It's just actually saying, right, well, we're going to look at our work from the outside, and we're going to get people in to help us do that, because we're not objective about some of this stuff. And what we think's important isn't always important either. So again, and everyone talks about client focused and collaboration and all these buzzwords that are flying around. But it was also sort of trying to keep us interested in our own work, finding new ways to talk about it. So, you 15 years, you bash away at it, and then you keep talking about the same house in the same way. It's like, we were really conscious that we wanted to be appealing to the kinds of people that we wanted to work with as well. So what would they be interested in?
Was COVID and the kind of the scariness of February, March last year, and sort of wondering, is our business or our clients about to put all our projects on hold? Or maybe some of them did. That's pretty common. Was that a big motivator for you guys? Because it seems like there was a bit of a turning point there where you just went, we want to change our strategy, or suddenly it just put things into focus for you maybe a little bit by the sounds of things.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, we definitely had been talking about it and thinking about it and trying to do it for quite a while before COVID hit. But yeah, we took a pretty big hit in April, so pretty much straight away.
Yeah.
Actually, sooner than that. It was pretty much March.
It was, everybody.
Yeah. And we just went, okay, well, what do we do now? And I remember being in the medium practice forum, and there was a fair bit of panic. So I had to turn the Slack account off because it was just giving me really bad anxiety. Collective anxiety was just feeding off itself.
Yep.
And so we thought, okay, well, we've got a great team. All we want to do is hold on to them this year. That was our goal. And so how can we do that? And it just kept coming back to marketing, because it was the thing that we'd always known that we weren't doing enough of. And we got told that from the very beginning when Ray did a review of our business 5-7 years ago. And it had got better, but it still hadn't got to the level where we were taking it seriously enough. And so when COVID hit, we actually had the time to do some of that stuff. So, Tim and I said, right, well, we're never going to have this time again, probably. So just let's do this properly and be serious about it. And Alicia was very much with us at that time as well. So definitely COVID gave us that space, I think.
Yeah. So when you think about other medium firms, and like, I guess your competitors, the other firms that you're kind of in consideration with, how do you feel about the way that they market themselves generally? Now that without talking about any specific practices, but I guess what I'm more curious about is what it's like being a medium practice as you start transitioning from doing less of that sort of private residential stuff that smaller firms do a lot more of, although I'm not sure that that's necessarily most of the work that you guys did, but let's just say that small firms generally are doing that. Then as your firm grows, you start doing more of your client-based changes, the types of clients you're working with, and the challenges of having a medium-sized firm are very, very different. But what are some of the kind of characteristics of firms at the size that you're at and the kind of peer group that you're in, as far as marketing goes, but just generally in terms of getting clients and those sorts of things?
Yeah, look, I think, if you sort of looked at, I've tried to do this, I've tried to actually look at some success stories in my industry, and older firms like the DCMs and there was a pretty straightforward line between going from small to big, and it often seem to work with the personalities in the firm. And so your classics DCM, where you had the artist, the accountant, probably shouldn't call him the account. But anyway, the business guy
Yep.
and the technician. So, and they had quite distinct roles.
Yep.
And whether that's how it actually operated inside the business, that was sort of the appearance that it had from the outside. And so I think having someone who, if you've got three people and one of them's pretty much out there trying to win new work or thinking about how you win new work and actually, on top of the marketing, then that's got to put you in a really good position. And then, so, having those clearly defined roles was something, again, that we didn't really have when we started out as a small practice. We were just, both of us, doing very similar things all the time. And that was probably the hardest thing we had to learn moving from smaller to medium was, okay, well, which bits of we can't all both do it all now. We've got to sort of back off from that. We've probably got to get off the tools a fair bit more than we do now. And what are we going to do? So, and what are we doing at the moment that one of us is better at than the other? That was pretty hard because we're both quite similar in a lot of ways in terms of being very interested in the design process. And where we got to was, and it sort of came out of Ray, really. He said, look, you're going to do this and you're going to do that, and let's see how it goes.
So he didn't take it easy on you then. He was just like, this is what I expect from the two of you. Now go do it.
Yeah, so he made me marketing guy. So, really? And Tim's going, thank God, I didn't want to do that. No, just kidding. So yeah, when we sort of said, right, well, we're responsible for that part of the business, that changed things a lot. And then it was this whole thing about, okay, well, how are we going to keep track of how we're going? Because we'd never done that. And how are we going to make ourselves accountable? We'd sort of never really done that either. As long as we were paying ourselves a salary, we were good. But, when you've got other people you're looking after, it's becomes a bit more serious. And so, yeah, the marketing thing really wasn't happening at that stage. We were just getting a lot of word of mouth, and that worked really well. We got some great clients and they just became repeat clients, and some of them are still with us. And they're gold, and you always want to have those. But yeah, the thing that changed everything was really just this appreciation that we've got to spend time designing the business rather than being on the tools. And there was a real moment where, and it's only been quite recent, where we've changed software platforms, and Tim and I just aren't effective anymore on that.
That actually might be a good tip for somebody who's struggling to put the tools down. Just switch the tools so you don't even know how to use them anymore. That'll keep you.
Right. Exactly right. And if you're sort of getting close to 50 or over 50, it's your brain is just has a complete meltdown.
You're like, I'm not learning Revit. That's not what I'm going to do over the next couple of years. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's more the point. Is that a good thing to be doing? So when you've got a business that's trucking along and really needs a lot of work to keep it running operationally, but sales and marketing is a big part of that. And so that helped a lot, was saying, okay, well, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to stay off the tools, but they're good enough, that the tools are good enough that you can jump in and sort of do what you need to do without getting into the bogged down in the technical details.
Yeah.
But yes, did I answer that question? Not really.
No. But we'll come back to it, because I want to know more of your kind of thoughts about, I guess, differentiation and kind of where you feel that other firms sit, what the competitive aspects of the medium space is like from the client's point of view, because it is a bit different to like some of the small practice marketing, which is usually kind of more the focus of this podcast and the kind of work that I do with clients as well. It really does differ once you start getting into the world where your clients are businesses and institutions and people that you can find on LinkedIn. They're visible people. They're people that actually exist, right? It's not like residential projects where it's like, where's the next one coming from? It could be that bloke. It could be her down the street. You don't know, right? So the dynamics of kind of marketing yourself at that medium scale, when I'm looking at the list of clients that you've got, where it's just museums and developers and universities, and like it's this kind of institutional level. So you sort of, do you feel more comfortable in that kind of marketing environment where you feel like your potential client is more of a known entity? You can kind of think about them more specifically and, develop those
Yeah,
relationships and stuff like that.
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's still really difficult though, because say pick a university, for instance.
Yeah.
You kind of do your homework and work out, okay, well, this person's in property services and this person's important and da 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 da. And I've done the wire. I've had people up on the wall with strings connecting them, and
You're kidding me.
no, I haven't. But you could do that if you wanted to. But this is another thing that Ray's always said is it's got to be face to face, and to sort of be sitting in the background and thinking that you're going to put the pieces together. So getting the face to face conversations is key, and that's how do you do that? And cold calling. I mean, who doesn't have nightmares about that, right? I mean, so you shouldn't be doing that. That's
Yeah.
the other thing. It's always got to, there's got to be some connection there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why would you take the call? I mean, yourself, you don't take a call if it's someone you.
Yeah. So you guys are doing the sort of the in-depth thought leadership content marketing at your Tuesday marketing meeting, and then you're planning out your cold calls for the week on Thursday at your sales meeting. Is that the idea? We saw that you downloaded our podcast. We would love to chat if you've got 15 minutes. But how do you sort of actually, that's sort of, I'm kind of jumping all over the place in my line of questioning here, but how does sales work for you? I mean, you have a sales meeting and you're going, cold calling's not our thing. So what is your kind of approach, or what have you found is sort of helpful? I guess pre-COVID, then post-COVID, we'll kind of probably talk about those things separately.
It comes back to that question about, well, what do you have to offer that's useful? And if it's just a sales pitch, well, forget it. But if you've actually got something that you can think of that's informative and helpful, and maybe not even useful at the time, but might be useful down the road, it's actually getting in front of the right people more than once. And that I remember a friend saying, because he just got published the first time any of us had sort of been published, and I said, "This is freaking amazing! You're going to get so much work." Nah, come on, you got no idea what you're talking about. It just doesn't happen like that. It's got to be a slow build up, and it's got to hit you from different directions, and maybe at a certain point, if you've got enough of that kind of critical mass out there, they pick up another magazine that's got something in there, but maybe it's not a whole piece, it's just a reference, and that triggers a memory of something that you did, and then maybe you got a chance. But this sort of conventional thing of I'll get in the architectural press and somehow that's going to lead to more architecture, just hasn't seemed to work for us, for sure. So when we get something published, that the phones don't start ringing ever.
No.
No. So It's more about, okay, well, what can we do that's going to be sustained and consistent? And that's what we're working on right now with these thought pieces and the podcast. And then, you've got to be a little bit, stick your foot in sometimes and just go to some of these industry events. And so there was a time when I don't do it so much anymore, and this is what COVID's quite difficult in some ways. I did go to a few of the property council events, and you absolutely, if you can meet someone and have a conversation with them, it's just the best thing. And then maybe you follow up with something about, again, if you can find a way to help them, that's got to be the best way to be remembered. And I guess the other thing is just with COVID, trying to do it virtually I've found that really difficult. So I've been to quite a few forums where someone's talking. I've done one where you give a talk and the feedback is just not there. It's just, there's brutal. A bit of chat going on.
It's brutal, isn't it? And I hate it. Well, I like it because I find it a lot more comfortable kind of giving a webinar than doing like an in-person lecture, but it is tough afterwards when you just had a bunch of grey tiles and initials, and you had no idea whether anyone was nodding, smiling, taking notes. You can't
Yeah,
register
yeah,
any of it, and you go, "Did I do well there, or did that go terribly?" You don't even
yeah.
know.
I've got no idea. It's kind of horrifying, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. At least we're not doing stand up. I mean, that would just
I know. But stand up by Zoom, I mean, it's just as tough, right? You just don't know. Okay, cool.
yeah,
So that face to face stuff and going to those events was helpful. But your point about having kind of that multi pronged approach and lots of touch points with people over a long time and build that trust and that brand recognition and everything. And it doesn't just happen overnight with one thing, right? It's more of a it's an
yeah,
ongoing consistency type project where
yeah, for sure.
you're not trying to extract projects out of people on that first, you don't turn up on day one and go, okay, I'm here to do business, guys. Where's the projects,
Yeah, yeah. I got another meeting to go to if you haven't. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, I
interesting.
think that guys doing it really, really well out there. And the thing I notice about them is they've developed this brand
Who's that? Sorry.
that's quite. There are guys I know that are out there that are our
Oh,
size
right.
that are
Yeah.
doing it really, really well, and it seems to be just this consistent approach to building a brand. That look, it's probably very curated, but some of them it doesn't feel like that. It feels like they just keep doing good work, keep getting it published, but then putting their thoughts out there on whatever medium, Twitter or Instagram, or but consistently.
Can you mention an example?
Oh, I think I was thinking of KTA. I think do it really
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
and I think it's having different. It's also having different tones for different audiences. So,
Mm.
for instance, yeah, Kirsten's on Twitter a lot,
Yep.
which don't always have to agree with what she says, but she's there and she's opinionated.
Yep.
And then there's Instagram is also, but Instagram's good, but it's doing something quite different. And I think that's the thing that we've been grappling with is, okay, well, if we're going to have something on Instagram, maybe the podcast image for the podcast isn't the most exciting thing if it's Tim and I. So what's the next post? And that's been something that we sort of struggled with a bit, I got to say, because I know it was one of the main issues because I was being pretty controlling about it. And so I've had to let go a bit and say, look, we've got to set up an approach here that means other people can do it. And if that's a graphic consistency, that's great because I'm,
Yeah.
my anal retentive in me is fine then.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, but that's yeah.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Earlier when you were talking about kind of getting off the tools a little bit as recognizing that the tendency to want to do that was a little bit of a restraint in the growth of your practice. And what's interesting is that you have straight away had a pretty good approach to the content marketing in that you've thought it's probably best that I'm involved in this, right? And that might have been Alicia's recommendation, right? Because I think that any marketing person you're working with is going to tell you the marketing will be better if you're kind of at the center of it, right? But sometimes I do hear this from architects, this kind of thing of, can't someone else do it? Can I get it done for me completely? Like, can I just sort of be uninvolved from this? And I mean, that probably sounds crazy when we're talking about doing something like a podcast, but you've been a good sport straight away in your content and gone, I'll speed things up a little bit with maybe by being interviewed, having somebody work on the copy, or getting us quite a lot of assistance with the podcast. But you've still, in principle, gone, I'm going to put time into this, right? So
Yeah.
would you agree with that idea that it's just, I guess, maybe speak to, for you, how important you feel that it is to, even though you're trying to sort of delegate things as much as possible, but to still be involved in it. And you mentioned sort of being a bit of an anal micromanager, but maybe not so much on how it gets shared on Instagram, but in actually like making this really quite hefty content in the first place.
Yeah, look, I think it's got to be authentic, right? And if you're outsourcing it completely, I just don't see how you can bring that level of detail, and especially if it's fine if you're just talking about producing images, for instance, and a single line of text. But if you're actually going to start to talk about the things that are really sitting in behind the projects, the only people that know that are the people that worked on it. And so, I just think, yeah, you'd be kind of crazy to expect someone to be able to do that. But at the same time, doing it all yourself just wouldn't have worked for us either. Because, Tim's a really good writer, for instance, and he could probably do it, but it'd just be that pressure on him to always be doing the writing. And I think the other thing was just having someone edit it that wasn't me. So sometimes we edit each other's stuff and,
Yeah.
oh, I can't believe he did that. And what? That was perfect. What did he change that for?
Yeah.
But having someone outside who's, again, doesn't have the architect's goggles on, I think is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So did you, I guess, in creating this stuff, I mean, you mentioned that you're doing things like sharing your podcast on Instagram, but are there any other ways that you're thinking about, say, for example, like, are you guys sending all this stuff out in an email to your old clients, or, you've got this amazing podcast about public markets, for example. So do you start sending that to people in the public market space that don't even, that have never even heard of you before, and you just go, hey, here's this new podcast? Like, what are you kind of doing to promote some of this stuff? Because you spend a lot of time making it, but then the promoting it is kind of just as hard, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think you've definitely hit on something. I mean, I don't think we pushed it very hard because I think we were a bit nervous about it, being our first podcast. So I think you're absolutely right. You should be doing that. If you go to all the trouble of making it, why wouldn't you sort of put it out there, and try and target a few people as well? And so that's the next stage, is actually saying, okay, well, now that we've got a plan and now that we're actually generating content, what's our process for getting it out there, and is it working too? Because that's the other thing. So how do you measure the success of these things? Other than how many downloads it's had, because that's who knows. But if you're actually starting to get phone calls and people interested and emails, well then, yeah, great. I mean, we did actually have whether it was just beginner's luck, but we had a call that led to a project pretty much straight after one of our articles. And so it does happen.
Yeah.
And we couldn't believe it. That was just like, right, okay.
I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, there's always a bit of beginner's luck, isn't there? But you go out with your first couple of articles and you got a potential client on the phone. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Did that feel quite coincidental, or did the stars just kind of, they aligned perfectly? So what was the thing that this inquiry kind of, or this prospect sort of said to you, or did they have any comments about the article that they had read, or
oh wow, I just read that article and I happened to be thinking about a really similar, so it was to do with micro tenancies in retail, and the relationship that shopping malls could have in terms of looking at public markets. What are some of the lessons? And it was a shopping mall been thinking along those lines. So it just,
I mean, that's just so specific. If you just happen to be thinking of something as specific as that, then you come across an article that just happens to align perfectly. I mean, that must feel like, that must hit you like a ton of bricks, going, what are the chances that these guys put out an article on this?
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. Well, hopefully more of that sort of stuff keeps happening with the news series. I'm sure it'll be interesting to see what you guys do to kind of, push it out there a little bit more, because you kind of mentioned that you sort of want people to discover it and come across it and everything. And most of your existing audience isn't, the vast majority of them aren't involved in public markets, even though quite a few of them are. It's still not a big part of your existing audience. So do you actually have any thoughts about that, in terms of, we've touched a couple of times on this idea of, you've got public markets in a few other areas, like a few of these other little specialties that you're kind of sort of focusing on. how are you sort of thinking about the different parts of your audience? Because you've got this existing client base that's spread across so many different areas. When you're making something, are you also kind of thinking, well, these clients that aren't directly involved in this will still be an end, like, kind of audience of this piece of content? Or are you just sort of thinking more along the lines of, we take each of these segments amongst our client base and kind of make something for them, then we move on to the next group and the next group? Like, is it more of that they kind of get their own piece of content, or are you trying to kind of go, this stuff is generally for everybody? I guess how you
Yeah,
sort
look,
of, yeah.
that's kind of really that gets to the nub of it, which is, is the market just quarantined within that small group of people? And who are the kinds of people that could think about markets? And once you start really getting into it, who's to say that the latest residential mixed use development can't have a market in the bottom of it? Or who's to say that a market can't have social housing on top of it? Or who's to say that some of the things that work in markets might work in a public space? And so who are the people that are thinking about those kind of projects, that maybe they didn't start with a market in mind, maybe they started with something completely different. And you see other firms, NH do this really well. They've got an incredible base of retail, but they've managed to expand on that to become as much about public realm as retail. And that's, you see some of the projects that they do, and they're really bedded in retail, but then they've also got a really great understanding of public space and the connections between buildings. And so I think they're quite a good model of how, being quite targeted and focused on a particular area doesn't have to limit you. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now with the more interesting developments is that they're a mix of functions and programs, and that changes over time as well. So it's not just, okay, well, we're going to have this singular version of what this thing is. It's actually going to adapt and evolve, which is what markets do. So, it's like, what's the broader thinking that sits behind markets, and how can you apply that to other kinds of projects? And I kind of think that's the key, because otherwise, as you said, you've got all these silos that are disconnected.
Trying to manage different audiences that don't on the surface feel like they have very much overlap with each other at all. But that's interesting. So you're saying that actually the way that there actually is there's potentially more overlap than appears at the surface, right? There's
absolutely.
The possibility that certain types of clients could have this, maybe they're broadening their thinking and the types of options they're looking at as well. So they're taking in a broader range of topics. It's quite interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think, I just think there've been some business models that you look at now that are changing and developing, and part of that is that they're really looking to other business models to feed off, and sort of the shopping mall's the classic one, where who would have known that Amazon would be the biggest tenant in some of the American shopping malls? And what does that mean for these spaces, and how are they going to change? And that those people that are the retailers sitting behind it are thinking about it. But as architects, if we just say, okay, well, I'm only interested in that small part of retail that was shopping malls for the last 20 years, then I think you're in a bit of trouble. So it's about being a bit responsive in terms of the way that you think about your work and the kinds of work that you're looking for as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So as I'm imagining that kind of you're probably a lot busier now than you were in April last year, or that would be my guess anyway, that things are going a little bit better now. Then are you finding it? Do you think it's going to be tough to fit in? Like, what's your schedule of content looking like for the near future? I guess, what's your sort of works in progress at the moment in this area? Do you kind of have multiple things at different stages, or is it does the way that you and Tim and everyone else prefer to work more of focus on one piece at a time from start to finish, then move on to the next one? What's your approach at the moment that you think is working?
that was sort of the approach last year. It was,
Yeah.
okay, we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna get onto this, and then, and it was good, but it wasn't as fast as it needed to be. So what we're looking at now is really getting Alicia's involvement at a high level, and more of her time as well, so that we've actually got content happening, even if we aren't necessarily on it as much. I mean, so we'll be on it a similar amount of time, but we'll actually be generating more content. And part of that's about bringing others in the office onto it as well. And so I think the thing that we'd like to get to is where you really get more of a, it comes back to what you're saying before about Tim and I being heavily involved in the content. We'd actually really like to start to open it up to the studio. And I mean, to a degree, we don't want to have too many posts of Friday drinks. And I mean, I think that's part of it, though. We have a great office, and we kind of want to show that off a bit, but we also are really keen on hearing some of the voices inside the office, and how you do that is something that we've still got to work that out, I think. But it's certainly,
I think it's 4 or 5 different podcasts. That's my idea. So I think you and Kathy in Brisbane have a podcast. I think Tim and Kathy have their own podcast. You and Alicia have a podcast on, marketing. That's one possibility. That's one possibility. Yeah, exactly. And you guys just become a little media company over there.
Yeah.
Actually, just quickly on Kathy, because we haven't really spoken about her much so far in this meeting. But you've got another director in Brisbane, is that correct? And that's what she started with you and Tim in the last year.
Yeah, Katie's been working with us on and off. A long time. It's really been, so she's based in Brisbane. And has really been, has more of an urban design background. And also really strong ties with academia. So we've had projects where she's been helping us on the projects. And then last year we said, okay, well, let's have a proper crack at trying to get Brisbane up and running. And we have an office there. The timing wasn't great, obviously. So we set a spot up there. It's a co-working space. Katie's there. The idea was to win work and start the office up and get a graduate and really launch the thing. And we've had some really interesting nibbles, and we've done a couple of feasibilities and small projects, but we haven't had enough work there to really sustain a full-time office. And so this is something where, again, the marketing, we haven't done a lot of marketing around the Brisbane office, and how we do that and when we do that, and we need to get onto it. It's something. It's
in the pipeline.
Yeah, very much. And I think the thing, again, having a bit of extra time with COVID really helped us decide that that's something that we want to put a push on. And Katie's been generating some fantastic content. And it's been great to be able to pitch for different kinds of work, because we've got Katie's skills in the team now as well. So some of those bigger urban scale projects.
And so through the content, she's hopefully able to start building a base there for you guys in those some of those areas of the industry. Just to start that process.
I mean, it is a bit difficult because, again, it's a competitive marketplace up there, and you're starting out. I mean, it's taken us 15 years to get to where we are.
It doesn't happen overnight, right? Launching in a new city, from like starting off in one person in a co-working space and building up to eventually a full office there, I guess is where it's
absolutely. And it's really that thing about, okay, well, are we going to go that traditional trajectory that we went on? When I say traditional, we didn't really do the more typical start with family houses and then get bigger and bigger resi, and then
Yeah.
multi-res, and because we had commercial clients pretty much from day one. So National Gallery and also Federation Square, we had connections there. So that really helped.
Yeah.
But having said that, it's kind of like those clients lasted for a while, and then we did a period where we did quite a few houses and extensions. So that was delayed. But
Yeah.
I think the thing is, you look at Brisbane, you go, okay, well that's one road, and that's probably not easier, but I think winning a house job's different to winning a job at a uni. And what do you have to do to win a job at a uni if you're a new office? That's kind of the question.
Yeah, no, that was the question I was about to ask. so because I think that's the interesting part, because I think you're talking about this traditional path that evolving slightly bigger and bigger and bigger projects, starting from grandma's patio all the way up to eventually the museum or something. But you're starting the new office and going, Brisbane is this. It's a separate market. It's a new market. They're completely new people. We don't know the people there. They don't know. We do have a reputation as an office, but we're starting. We're at the starting line, but you're still going. You're going. We're going to try and go straight to a certain scale of work. And so your approach so far has a couple of things to it. So you're doing. So Katie is working on. She's doing some marketing stuff. As far as like producing some content and some research and some things like that. What other sort of ideas are there at the moment around kind of getting those, maybe even just those first client, that first little handful that will start everything for that office? Is there anything that you can talk about?
Yeah, so it's been, she has great contacts through uni.
Yeah.
Having taught at uni for quite a while, and also on some council contacts as well. And so, and as well as some developers. So it's been a case of basically going back to some of these people that Katie knows and introducing them to the new role that she's got as a director of Tandem and what Tandem can do. And so, the fact that she has trust with these people and respect, and then how does that translate into something that we can do to help these people? And that that hasn't always been easy, because I think sometimes you've had conversations of one kind, and then you come back and have a different, more commercial conversation. But I think what we've learned is longer term, it can definitely work. And just to give you an example, so we didn't get to markets through knocking on the market door. We actually ran a studio at Melbourne Uni about South Melbourne market. So we basically got some master's students and said, okay, here's a real problem. They need a master plan. And through the market management, they got on board, and the council got on board, and we just had this fantastic studio where we got access to all the right people, and the students did an amazing job. They presented to council, and that then led to a small stall at South Melbourne Market. So, it wasn't a terribly cunning plan. It just kind of happened that way.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're in there and you're meeting these people and you're showing them that you can contribute and add value, it's worked before. And I think just that the academic thing as well, if you can, because the proposals they did, some of them were pretty out there, but a lot of them were actually surprisingly practical. And I think the people at the market were really surprised. It's like, okay, well, these uni guys have done an amazing job.
Actually done a really good job, yeah.
That's right. No, I won't say that. But, I think some of them were going, well, why can't we just do that? Can we just have that proposal, please?
Yeah.
But, it's sort of being around and being involved and being engaged with other younger people who are studying has just been a really fantastic. I mean, that's something that's definitely dropped off a bit, and I'd be kind of keen to get back involved in the unis at some point. But it's harder and harder.
So it kind of gives you, it sounds like, I mean, you say it's not a very cunning plan. I reckon it's a pretty cunning plan. Setting up a studio. No, I get that. But it gives you sort of it gives you a legitimate seeming context to kind of do some unsolicited um idea generation,
Yes.
and the room to do that and the resources to do that. And it also gives you the it sort of opens some doors for you in terms of then reaching out to them to involve them in the program. So it kind of is a,
Yeah.
obviously university and architecture studios, they do provide that advantage. Do you think that there's a way that you can kind of recreate that in a practice without being directly involved with the university, or do you think university is just potentially the best place to do it? Would you ever consider going, hey, what if we, you know, our marketing project became to work on some of these things just out of nowhere and start involving
Yeah.
people? Do you think it makes sense, or would you ever be attracted to doing it that way? Or would you always go, okay, we're gonna do this as a university thing?
Yeah. Look, that's a super interesting question, because I think once you take yourself out of university, it's really difficult to keep the commercial hat off. And I think so. Just to give you an example of, Tim and I both worked at Lab for a long time,
Yeah.
and those guys had come from strong academic backgrounds, had taught at the AA, and they really tried to set their practice up a bit like a university studio.
Mm.
So they had pin-up crits, and the relationship was pretty much kind of uni lecturer to student sometimes.
Mm.
And it was good to a point, but it actually sort of that process kind of got marginalized, because meanwhile we've got to build this bloody thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, we can't be having these long debates about patterns
Yeah.
forever. So, you know, then there's another group that just kind of got on with it, and that these guys. So somehow you got to kind of bring that together. And I think at uni, you just the best uni studios are the ones where you really let loose and just kind of really go for it. And who cares if you can't work out how to build it straight up? I mean, I was at RMIT, and that was pretty out there when I was there.
Yeah.
So, and but having said that, I think, you know, if you can set up an environment in an office that is like a studio, that means that people feel like they can contribute in a meaningful way, and you sort of lose that thing that we had at RMIT where it was really quite it was brutal, really. Like you presented and you got destroyed quite often, and that was meant to make you stronger.
Yeah.
You can do it without that, and people really have a meaningful engagement, then I reckon that's a fantastic way to run a studio. And if you can make the time to actually do research, so you're bringing questions to the design problem that are backed in, you know, in fact, that you've actually gone out and done the work, then, you know, that makes it a stronger project. And I think clients really respond well to that. Not, you know, okay, this is my latest wacky roof design, because I wanted to. So yeah, I reckon that what you've just described is something that we sort of aspire to, and we have got processes in the office that try to do that. And it's really as much just having a bloody big pinboard in the office and making people put stuff up on the wall and making people stand around. Sometimes it's really awkward, and sometimes it's fantastic. But yeah, doing that has been a really good process, and that's why the virtual thing's been hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, one of the.
I like that, because I think that just almost a good place to leave it, because I think it ties back into what I think I'm seeing that's so good about the marketing content that you're making, is that it reminds me of that studio stuff, that research stuff. It is kind of allowed to be a little bit non-commercial. And as you pointed out earlier, if you were to treat it completely commercially, you'd probably ruin it. So, you know,
Sure.
almost by creating that little bit of separation, that's how you create that quality and try to make something that is good and has some substance to it and has ideas. And I also, you touched on saying earlier that you're actually using it as an exercise to consolidate your ideas. You're actually benefiting from it and treating it like research in a way as well, even though it's doing something which on the surface is quite simple, making a podcast, but you're using it as a way to sharpen your own ideas in the studio. That's probably why you haven't promoted it. You guys have gone, we've got everything we need out of it. It's up there. We're happy with it.
Not you guys. Yeah.
James, thank you very much for coming on. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, pleasure, Dave. Thanks for having me. That was great.